president is also front and center on the world stage, making some American allies wary of working with the U.S. Joining us now is J.J. Greene, national security correspondent with our news partners WTOP. J.J., thanks for being here.
Thanks, Victoria. Thanks for inviting me again.
It's now been 3 years since Russia invaded Ukraine. It was on this day in 2022. The U.S. was fully in support of Ukraine, but in a stunning shift today, the U.S. voted with Russia against the UN General Assembly resolution to condemn Russia's war against Ukraine. What does this tell the world?
This is, Victoria, in my estimation, the most dangerous time that the world has faced in 80 years, since the end of World War II. And there are three reasons for that. Number one, it's the nuclear factor. A part of the reason why Russia hasn't gone further than it has in attacking Ukraine is the nuclear deterrence of the U.S. and Russia. Russia has about 5,000 nuclear weapons. NATO, with the U.S., has about 6,000. Russia has hinted that it would use nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons, if it didn't get what it wanted. So the U.S. was a big, stumbling block in that. So recently, since the U.S. has sided with Russia, it seems, at least in this vote and some other things, it suggests that Russia might have the upper hand. So with Russia's 5,000 nuclear weapons and the U.S. out of the equation, NATO only has 500. So the question now is, will Russia use those tactical nuclear weapons? Number two, Germany's leader has said it can't rely on the U.S. anymore, and that is essentially for the entire bloc of NATO. So they're moving on from that. That's a problem. And the third thing here is this. The U.S. is under attack internally, at least when you talk to federal workers, when you talk to the intelligence community, when you talk to the FBI and others. You know, so there's this thing that the White House has been pushing, and President Trump has said this many times. This is a golden age for the U.S. This could very well be a golden opportunity for U.S. allies, or rather U.S. Enemies and adversaries.
With everything coming down, we have everything happening stateside. We have everything happening around the world. Americans right now, they're focused on home, which is their jobs, their livelihood, how they're going to put food on the table. Do you think Americans are really paying attention to everything else that's happening outside our borders?
I think it's hard to separate them right now, because people that watch your show, people that watch ABC 7 all the time, we have to give them credit. They keep up with things. Because, you know, I see people all the time who tell me what you and I talk about back during the week, and this might be on the weekend. People keep up with things, and they're a lot smarter than we often give them credit for, and people recognize now that there is a connection between what happens here and what happens out in the world, especially with this president and this new administration we have now. And let's be clear about this. People don't just reside here in the U.S. People travel. They go to other places, other countries. They have relatives in other places and in other countries. So they hear things from there, too. People are aware of what's happening, but they're also aware, too, that the U.S. perhaps right now, even with all of the tragedy going on in Ukraine and Sudan and other places, the U.S. is probably the epicenter of the world right now because of this change from what people have gotten used to the U.S. being. And they're concerned that it may not be that anymore. And people who live here in the U.S., well, they're the most worried about it because, as you said, it has significantly upended the way we Americans live.
France's President Emmanuel Macron is at the White House speaking with President Trump, allegedly speaking about what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. What do you think Macron could say to President Trump that might influence where he goes next with what he says?
I think we got a glimpse of it a little earlier in their, what they call the pool spray of the two leaders before they went into their luncheon and then later on into their sit-down meeting, when the president made a statement regarding how repayment for the war would take place. And in that statement, Macron made it clear that Russia was the aggressor. And this is something that's very interesting today because the U.S. has declined, along with the rest of the expected allies, to call Russia for what it did, essentially siding with Russia against this resolution, condemning Russia for starting the war. But Macron made it a point to say in that meeting, in that discussion, Russia was the aggressor and Russia did this. And he went on to explain what the payment process was for the money that's frozen, Russian assets that are frozen. But it was a big moment when he corrected the president. And it was very clear that the president heard that, because later he said, you can believe what you want about what he said. But it was clear that Macron had made his point that Russia was the aggressor and we need to treat Russia that way. Those are his words, I think.
And JJ, we were all here in 2022. We know Russia was the aggressor. We saw the lead up to it from satellite images of their tanks getting closer to the border. We saw it in the weeks leading up to them crossing into Ukraine. The everyday person can go back on X, on Instagram, on the news feeds and see that that is what happened. Why is President Trump saying that that is not the fact?
You know, your guess is as good as mine in terms of why he's doing this or saying this. What I think actually is happening here is that we need to stay focused on what we know as truth. Because one of the things that's happening here is something called hybrid warfare, information warfare. The president has his point of view, and he has very successfully communicated that to the American people, getting elected, fairly getting elected. But what he got elected on and what he's doing now is slightly different from what I think a lot of people expected. A lot of people didn't expect him to say that, to say what he said. And we can't begin to unpack why, even though he knows that this is different from what truth and fact says. So I think what we really have to focus on now is what we know and what we hope to achieve, and that is peace in Ukraine and peace around the world. But more importantly for Americans is to achieve stability here at home and to right the ship, because a lot of people feel like they've been tossed out in recent days and weeks, losing their jobs, losing their ability to predict what's going to happen to them, and, you know, having their leader say things that they know aren't true. So what people, I think, probably might want to focus on, at least a couple of people have suggested this to me, is that this is all a part of a political strategy, and just not buying into all of the things that they hear, just staying focused on what it is that they need to do to get to where they want to be and to have this country be what it is that they want it to be.
And JJ, we're just getting word that President Macron and President Trump are going to be holding a press conference in just a little bit. We have video now showing people getting ready. This is a live picture where we'll hear from the two leaders, the French leader and the American leader, about what they are discussing today. And JJ, there is a lot coming down the pike. It is very encouraging that people are listening and really focusing on what is happening. Any last words for what you're focusing on for the rest of today?
It's going to be a rocky day. It's probably going to be a rocky month or two or while, or I'm not sure how long it's going to be rocky. But I just say to people, strap in, just remember what you know is true. Just remember where it is that you want to go. And just remember the sun comes up every day after each night. Sometimes it's really dark, but that's usually just before the dawn comes. So just stay focused and stay true to what you believe is true.
JJ, always appreciate the insight. We will talk to you soon.
You're welcome.